And I want to welcome everyone who's trickling in right now. I can see that attendees are coming in, so welcome everyone to this webinar we have entitled Seizing the Narrative. And I'm going to be making introductions shortly. Right now you can see some blank screens with people's name, Akif Kariman and Murray Nossel. I'm going to be introducing them shortly. First of all, I want to introduce myself first and just say I'm Jerome DeRoy, and I am the CEO of Narativ, and I've been moderating now these webinars for the past year. We started in November a particular stream of webinars on advocacy. And I'm seeing here that actually Brett Davidson, who was in the webinar last November, is telling us that he can hear us loud and clear, which is very nice. But yes, we started out with Brett Davidson from Open Society Foundations in November, and we particularly wanted to focus on advocacy because Narativ, this company that I'm the CEO of, and you'll meet the founder of Narativ very soon. We have been involved with advocacy since really our inception, and even before Narativ was created, and Murray will tell you a little bit more about the origin of that story. So advocacy has always been something that we've been working in, and where storytelling and listening and our particular method has been impactful and helpful. And so we are now endeavoring to ask people that we've worked with to come in and share their knowledge and experience on these webinars. So you can expect more of these as we go along. First one was in November. We're now doing another one, and we've got the great pleasure of having a new guest. And so for this particular webinar, we're going to be looking at a particular topic. So the last time we looked at storytelling for advocacy in kind of broad terms, and through the lens of our work with the Open Society Foundations and public health programs in particular. And this time we're going to take a little deeper dive into one topic in particular, which is the Roma. Now, many of you may not even be aware of who the Roma are or what the Roma stand for, and we'll look at that a little bit more and what the origin of that term is. But we've been doing some work since 2014, which was really an initiative from the Open Society Foundations, where the motivation was to help change the narrative of the Roma in healthcare in particular, and give better access to healthcare and create better dialogue between doctors and Roma patients, non-Roma patients, non-Roma doctors as well, and seeing how that can impact healthcare. So that's what we've been involved with since 2014. Through that experience, we've worked with Akif Kariman, who's one of our guests today. And Akif is really a leader in his community, and I'm going to pull up my notes so I get his bio right. So Akif is the first president of the Roma Community Empowerment and Organizing Association, Roma's Voice. He's known as the Rebel and has organized many protests in defense of the integrity and rights of Roma in Macedonia. He's also a public speaker, and he's discovered the power of stories in building a movement and defining leadership. His mission is to encourage and enable the Roma community through coaching, training, and strategizing on grassroots and broader political levels. And if you haven't seen this yet, on our website and in anticipation of this webinar, we've posted a story from Akif that he told at the Power of Storytelling conference in Romania last October, and which really is his origin story as a Roma person, and it really tells you a little bit about why he's doing this work now, but we'll let him explain that in a few minutes. Before we do that, I want to introduce you to the second panelist in this webinar, and that's Murray Nossel. Those of you who have been on to other webinars have met Murray before. Maybe you've done workshops where you've met Murray. So I'll introduce him now. Murray's the founder of Narativ. And he's an Oscar-nominated documentary filmmaker. He's also a storytelling performer. Maybe some of you know his work through Two Men Talking, which was an off-Broadway performance, as well as a performance that went to London, and where they did some work there. He's, of course, a trainer and a lead trainer, and he's one of the founders of this company. And he's the creator of this method, of this listening and storytelling method that we apply in many, many different contexts, but advocacy in particular, and that's really why we wanted Murray to be on this webinar in particular because that's been his specialty. And again, he'll talk more about why that is in his own story. I also want to mention that Murray is the author of the book called Powered by Storytelling, which is available on Amazon and anywhere you find books. And really his life's work has been to provide people of all backgrounds with this method of listening and storytelling to support their messages, and in particular their advocacy goals. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the topics that we're going to go through here. First of all, who are the Roma? And why this work is important and why it's important particularly to Akif. Then we're going to talk a little bit about this question of unity. That's something that we've talked a lot about in our work with the Roma, is the problem of disunity and how do we get to unity. And I know Akif has examples and stories about that. The third topic we're going to talk about is the connection between these advocacy goals that the Roma have and this movement with Narativ's method of listening and storytelling. And Murray will have an opportunity to speak about this a little bit more in terms of how those two things connect in the real world. And then the fourth topic is, hearing about leadership and storytelling from Akif's perspective. How has that advanced your own kind of leadership? And then what can people who are listening to this webinar and watching this webinar, what can you learn from this? And then we'll turn it to you for questions and answers. So I want to move it over to Murray first, actually, because when we were preparing for this webinar, we were talking about obstacles to listening, and I wanted to give you an opportunity, Murray, to speak a little bit more about that for our audience.
Thank you so much, Jerome, and hello, Akif. So great to see you and work with you again. I wanted to start by just reinforcing something that's so crucial to Narativ's method, and that is that there's a reciprocal relationship between listening and telling. So at this moment, I have some listeners that I know, and I have listeners that I don't know. And in fact, your listening is currently creating and shaping my telling. Beth, you've just come on screen, is that right? Okay. So there's a perfect example of an obstacle to listening, where something pops onto my screen unexpectedly, and it shifts my listening. It gets in the way of my listening. So what we do here at Narativ is we constantly evaluate how we are listening and how we are being listened to. Now, one of the most extraordinary things about working with Dr. Akif Kariman, who's our guest today, is that in terms of learning about Roma, who are the Roma? What is Roma? What are the issues that Roma are confronting in the world? And what is the way that the world relates to Roma? These are things about which I was ignorant before I started working with Akif and his fellow Roma leaders. We began working in Salzburg together in 2014 at the Salzburg Medical Institute. And part of the process of working with Akif and his colleagues is that I've constantly learned from errors that I've made in my speaking, errors that have just arisen in my assumptions. And when Akif and his colleagues have been courageous, and they have been courageous, to say, listen, Murray, what you've just said has become an obstacle in my listening. I can't carry on listening because of some kind of assumption that you've got or some kind of conclusion that you've come to which is not founded. It's through uncovering these obstacles to listening that's unblocked our communication. The clarifying of obstacles is such a powerful way of learning about who other people are. So on that note, Akif, who at this moment in time is a listener of me, I want to become a listener of you right now. And I want to know, and you've given me the heads up about this, so let's be transparent about that. But I want to know, what are the obstacles to listening that you have as we go forward into this conversation?
Thank you, Mari. First, I will start with something that I just noticed. For a moment, I looked at my photo on the screen, and I just noticed that my face is asymmetrical. So this side looks like it's tensed, but it's not. And I haven't noticed this until now. Another obstacle that is going for a while, and I was looking for this opportunity to share it with you. Actually, when this webinar was first time announced, I was presented as the leader of the European Roma. And at that moment, I felt strange in my body, and I was tensed, you know, like someone is presenting me that way, and I don't feel like I am the leader of the European Roma, because in fact that is true. I am only one young Roma leader who is only a part of the new emerging generation of many Roma leaders who are doing the same work that I'm doing, that we are advocating for the well-being of our community. So once I shared this obstacle with you, now I'm ready to continue with our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Akif. Yes, if I have any obstacle to listening, I would say that it also has to do with noticing the asymmetry of my face. And this is part and parcel of what's involved in having these webinars, is the ability to scrutinize yourself so closely when you're on screen, and trying to get the eye line right, you know, trying to make sure that I'm really connecting to you who I can see, and those of you who I can't see. I really want that connection to be in there and to be part of that. So I think those are the only obstacles I have to listening, and by speaking them, I release them and let them go.
It's great. I actually want to take this opportunity to just let our audience know, and the attendees right now who are watching this and listening to this, that, you know, this is definitely a point of learning. And I don't know how many people who are on this webinar have opportunities to meet online and, you know, to do video conferences like this, whether it's for a webinar, whether it's just regularly meeting. But I think thinking about what's currently getting in the way of my ability to listen to the person that's on the other side of that screen, but it really, that starts by not actually taking care of their issues or whatever might be getting in the way for them, but taking care of yours first, and being very transparent about it. So in the spirit of transparency, I'll also, and being transparent about our obstacles, I'll also say what mine currently, there's two really. One is that I'm a little under the weather, so my energy, those of you who have been on webinars with me may know me as a little more energetic and a little clearer even in the way that I'm speaking. So that's what's going on with me. I've got antibiotics, so I'm getting better, but not 100% yet. Second thing is something I wanted to say in the introduction, but then you reminded me of this, is that we are recording this. And so after this webinar, you will receive a replay of the webinar, and we're also going to be taking notes of all of those points, like the one that Murray and Akif just made, in terms of obstacles to listening and how important that is. Those methodological points that you can then use for your own advocacy goals, your own mission and vision and storytelling practices. So that's it. That's what's in my listening. So with that, I'd love, Akif, for you to maybe introduce us to the Roma via your own experience, because we always say that, you know, we can only speak for ourselves at Narativ, and we don't we never speak for anybody else. One of the things that we do is empower people to speak for themselves. And so I'd love for you, Akif, since you are one of the leaders of the Roma movement, and I've really taken that point, I'd love to hear from you. What is your, I don't want to say definition, but how would you respond to the question, who are the Roma?
Okay, so when I was in primary school, we were on 7th grade and we were learning about the different cultures and people that are living in Macedonia. And among the others, the Roma were mentioned, like happy people with free spirit, who are very musical, they enjoy life, and they move from one place to other place. So my classmates, and on the other hand, there was a quote about the Muslim Macedonians, so Macedonian Muslims, basically. And for them, there were different words and they were explained in different way. And all my classmates, they turned to me and they told me, but you see, Akif, you are not Roma, you are Macedonian Muslim. You don't have nothing related to what it is written in the book about the Roma. And I started reflecting and I told them, but no, I am Roma. And in this book, they are referring to the Gypsies. So me personally started to make that division between what a Roma means and what a Gypsy means, although it doesn't make any sense in reality. Why? Because the Roma people are actually many groups who emigrated from India 1,000 years ago, according to the official data. There are legends that are suggesting that we left our mother country even longer time ago. And when we entered, our ancestors, when they entered the European continent, they were seen as different. Because, Europe is the white continent, and now people from the Southeast Asia coming to their countries with a bit of darker skin and different lifestyle, culture, tradition. And at first they thought that we are coming from Egypt, which is not true. And that's why the British started using the term gypsies, like referring to Egyptians. While in Greek, they started using the term atziganoi, which means untouchable. And in the beginning, it wasn't used with negative meaning, untouchables in terms of, with this different culture, tradition, and free spirit, and that way of living, which was different for them in that settlement. But through the time, it evolved, and the term gypsy became synonym for all the negative things that can be imagined for a human being. But it was connected, we got the name from the non-Roma, basically, to be called gypsies, and it was connected with poverty, with dirtiness, with stealing, and many other negative stereotypes that I can't remember right now. And then, so hundreds of years passed when a group of Roma from all around the world, they decided to gather in one place and with the aim to define the identity of the Roma. And actually, that was the event, the first World Roma Congress, which took place in London in 1971. where these activists defined the modern identity of Roma. And the first thing that they did was adopting the term Roma, the term Rom in the Romani language, which means human, because it's been 1,000 years that we were treated as inhumans, as something that doesn't belong to this planet. And that's how they all agreed, yes, we will be calling ourselves Rom. And all the different groupations came together under this word, Rom. So we are Roma now. They also defined the anthem of our community and our flag and some other things. So basically, whoever uses the term gypsy, so I will use this opportunity to ask them not to ever use that term, because it is quite offensive and painful, actually. And Mare or Jerome, if you have further questions, I can stop here, or I can continue with the, yeah.
I definitely have a question. First of all, thank you, Akif, for the history, and just to be able to do that in a few minutes, kind of amazing, and so clearly as well. And so my question has more to do with your advocacy goal, your activism, and your own personal experience. So I've got the broad view, and I completely understand now what the word Roma means and how it's even come to mean what it means, and as opposed to these other offensive words that have been used. So that's the historical perspective. I wonder, from your personal experience, you know, there's a question that we always ask when we work with people, which is why story and why now? And you were talking the other day about your own why, of why you do this work. So I'd love to just hear from your perspective, Akif, about what's your why? Why do you, as a Roma person, why have you chosen to be an activist? Where did that come from?
Yeah. Okay, so my why practically started in the third year of my high school studies. And I went in the other classroom to borrow some books, because none of the students in our classroom had the biology book with us that day, because we weren't supposed to have that class. However, and I went to borrow a couple of books, and I saw some guys repeating my question in funny way, making funny voices like, can I borrow the books for biology because we didn't have those books in our classroom? No, I felt intimidated, you know, and I felt bad at that moment. And I thought, you know, during the break, when I will return the books, I will ask these guys why they spoke in funny, making funny voice, you know, and repeating what I asked. When I asked them why they did that, one of them told me, what do you want? And I told him, I don't want nothing. I just want to know, why did you do that, you know, because it hurt my feelings and it made me feel sad, you know. If I did anything wrong, just let me know. And then the other guy slapped me in my face, and we started fighting. But luckily there was one guy who separated us, and I used that opportunity to go and to report the incident to the director and to the psychologist. And after that, I'm going upstairs and reaching the hall where my classroom is. And then one of the guys that we argued with just started shouting, "You're fucking gypsy. I will, your gypsy mother," and everything. And at that moment, I felt like I'm blind. It was complete darkness, and all I could see was this guy's body. I started running towards him and jumped and started hitting him. And I don't remember how many punches he got from me, but I could see the blood all over the wall, the hole, you know, and at one moment someone was touched my shoulder, and as I turned, I saw the security guy down. I mean, there are no words that can explain, you know, how lost I was in that moment. And I even, you know, succeeded without any knowledge to defeat the security guy, to put him on the ground. And after that incident, we were invited at the director's office, and the director asked me, "What happened, Akif?" I explained him. And then he told me, "You know, but Akif, they try to fight with you, as you say, but we send them into the hospital instead. You know, it doesn't make any sense." And I replied, "Mr. Director, but it's one thing that they thought that they are stronger than me. And it's completely another thing that it turned out that I am stronger." And then he asked me again, "Okay, Akif, but tell me, why?" And I replied, "Mr. Director, if you were Roma and you were slapped in the face just because you are Roma, what would you do?" No, and
Wow.
he
Yeah.
didn't reply nothing. He became aware of that situation, and basically after that incident, I had time to reflect on what happened. It was my first and only fight in my life, and that's how I decided that I will fight for my community, but not physical fights.
It's great.
Thank you for the listening. I mean,
I'd like to jump in here with the next question, Akif, because I've heard something in a new way now, and that is really just the aggression that came up in you in that situation, and how you reacted with aggression. That in a sense, aggression and fighting were the only means that you had in that moment. And it's not even as if you were thinking consciously that those were your only means. As you say, it just came up in you. And yet at the same time, that's the only time that you've ever been aggressive. And you have been working to disseminate understanding and information about what it is to be Roma ever since then. Now, one would imagine that when you are talking to your Roma brothers and sisters, that there would be a sense of solidarity and consistency in terms of how people relate to one another and to the world outside, based on the fact that maybe many people have had the kinds of experiences that you've had. But I'm just wondering, what is it like then? Not so much in terms of dealing with non-Roma people, but what's it like for you within the various Roma communities? And what have you discovered there?
so in today's world, to be honest, it's hard and it's quite challenging to be, you know, young and educated Roma and to be part of the community. Because in the past, we didn't have that opportunity to educate ourselves and to study. There were few people who had the opportunity to go across the system and to get university degrees. And, you know, there is some informal rule that if you finish university, you are not perceived as part of the community, because your code, your behavior, and your attitude then are a bit different than the ordinary everyday living of Roma, and you just go there with different behavior, and they don't perceive you as part of the community. And that's actually where storytelling helped me to reconnect with my community, and to gain the trust of the community. Why? Because there was a pub, I mean Roma pub, and I started going there to have my morning coffee instead of going to some fancy other, a lunch or whatever. And whenever I would enter that pub, they would switch the TV to Discovery Channel, and it happened once, 2 times, 3 times, and I noticed that they switched the channel because of me. And then after a couple of times, when the owner of the pub switched the channel, and I told him, can you reverse the channel to one wedding that you were playing 3 days ago? It was on YouTube, please. I like the music there. Oh, you like music, like you like weddings? And I told him, yes, why not? I mean, and that's how I started, talking. I used that opportunity to talk about myself a bit, and, through him to influence also others. And through sharing my personal story, my everyday stories, as a way to connect with them, and to get their trust, to open themselves to share their stories. And at the end, when you open yourself from deep within, and when you share your story, you see that there are not big differences between all people, not, especially those who are coming from the same community and neighborhood.
So really what's happening there is that in terms of the kind of language that we've been using, you changed the listening environment in that pub. They had a certain way of listening to you. And you notice that by virtue of their having put up the Discovery Channel. So when you said change it to what we all love watching, you changed that listening environment. And as such, people started to listen to you in a different way. So it's such a beautiful example of how that actually works.
At this point, I'd love to hear more from you, Murray, about, because it feels apropos, we've heard a very personal experience from Akif, from your own life, of what led you to being part of this movement. And then another personal experience of, well, what Murray just described, that listening environment and how that changed, and how you managed to make a connection with people, which is, the perhaps the only reason that we talk about storytelling so much and that we teach storytelling so much is to connect. And so I'd love, Murray, for you to maybe talk a little bit about the origins of that discovery, if you will. I don't think I've ever put it in those terms, but your own discovery of how storytelling connects with people and why this method exists in the world. And then I think we can go back to connecting that further to Akif's work as well.
Thank you, Jerome. I'm aware of the fact that at least some of the people who are on this webinar at the moment are familiar with the experience that I had in the early 90s as I was working with AIDS patients. And at that time, there were not yet the protease inhibitors. And so my job working in this AIDS program was to help people come to terms with the fact that they were dying. Now, when I tell the story, and I've told the story thousands and thousands of times, I'm aware that each telling is a brand new telling. And that when I tell the story now, it's in the context of the conversation that we're having A. And B, it's in the context of all of those who are listening right now. Now, the reason why I kind of really want to make this point is, Akif, I'm sure that you'll agree with me, or let me not put words in your mouth. Do you agree with me when I say that when you're in a leadership position and you are telling your origin story, you end up telling the so-called same story over and over and over again, because that's the story that really communicates so powerfully who you are and what you do.
Yeah, exactly. It is the same story, but always told in different way, because as you mentioned before, you know, the listening shapes our telling.
So, yeah, you know, here I am telling the story, and how do I make it real for myself? Based on the question, which is, you know, how does listening and storytelling in a collective environment create unity? And I'm thinking of, you know, I'm standing in front of this door with the skull and crossbones on it, knocked, hammered onto it, and it says dangerous, hazardous human waste material, because it's actually a laboratory specimen box. And I walk into the doors of the AIDS program in Brooklyn, and my supervisor says to me, "Look, Murray, you know, what you're going to be experiencing here is something that's, you know, not what you've done before. You come from South Africa, you're a clinical psychologist. I don't know what kind of work you were doing over there in South Africa, but you're not a clinical psychologist here anymore. You're a social work student, and you are to help people come to terms with the fact that you're dying, that they're dying." And I said, "Well, you know, what do I do?" And he said, "Anything and everything, you know, help them emotionally, help them with practical needs, help them with housing." And so I start talking to the clients in this program, and I ask them, you know, what I'd been taught as a psychologist, which is to, you know, kind of try and explore in a way what their experience is like, and to explore for themselves, because I'm thinking, well, that's what they should do to come to terms with the fact that they're dying. Well, I mean, you know, one woman, Sharon, you know, just rolled her eyes at me, and you know, she said to me, you know, "Why? What kind of question is that? How would you feel? What would, you know, what would your experience be if you knew you were dying?" And I didn't know what to do, really. I told this to my supervisor, and eventually I created this listening and storytelling group, which was to allow people to tell their stories as a way of communicating who they are, but also leaving something of themselves behind. Because what I did notice was that when people died, their belongings just ended up in these black garbage bags, which nobody came to claim. So people, by telling their stories in a dedicated listening environment, were able to leave something of themselves behind. And what I said was that those of us who live in the future, who are still alive in the future, will be the ones who will carry those stories within us. And that's how, in a sense, you'll be remembered. Now, there is a video, and perhaps Jerome could make it available to those who are watching this webinar. It was made by a gay men's health crisis at the time. They made a little film about the work that I was doing with these AIDS clients. And one of them says on the video, "Well, you know, I don't like group therapy," and sort of coming into a group situation for therapy purposes. But Murray, you know, really emphasized the listening aspect and the storytelling aspect, and I didn't feel like I was being given therapy. And then he says, "And I realized that Murray wasn't one of those patronizing white people, and that even though he came from South Africa, it was just that, he came from South Africa." Now, in a sense, what happened was that I needed to move. I needed to move my position. I needed to abandon, in a sense, what I had been taught. And I had to be willing to learn from the clients themselves, from their experiences. And so I'm talking there about how I created unity for myself. And perhaps I'm saying that because of your story that you just told, Akif, that it's sort of that listening created a certain telling in me about how I was able to jump over that divide. But the other thing is that when I began to make videos of the clients of their program with their request or according to their requests, when they came together in my storytelling group and they shared their stories, they began to see how they were not separate and their experiences were not separate from one another. They were connected by a unity of experience. And it's that connection and unity of experience that allowed people to form together in a sense of collective action. And so really that's what I've learned so powerfully about how listening and storytelling can contribute to the formation of cohesive movements, social movements.
Mm. Thanks, Murray. I'd love to, a couple of things that I just want to do a time check first. So we've got about 15 minutes left. I'd love for people to, if you have any questions, to start putting those into the Q&A box, and then we'll start to, as they trickle in, I'll repeat them for our panelists, and we can start to answer those. So while people are doing that, I'd love to just hear Akif's reflections on, I think, everything we've talked about until now. We first started talking about the obstacles to listening and how important it is to identify those in order to even be able to listen to yourself and even tell a story. And then we talked a little bit about the listening environment in this kind of very concrete way that you described, Akif, with the Roma pub and the changing of the channel and how that connected you to them in a different way. And of course, we heard about Murray's story and how storytelling links up to personal storytelling, links up to movements and the creation of a movement and other people telling their stories, because I think that was a big result of your story, Murray, is that many people felt empowered to tell their story as a result of one person telling their story. And I know that that's the case for you too, Akif, but I wonder now, in terms of your own leadership at the present moment and for the future, what connections do you make between your advocacy goals and your own mission in the world with storytelling, and how do those two connect with each other?
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to say that even before I met Murray, I was familiar with the storytelling, but not narratives method. And I was already using the storytelling in order to motivate the community to engage in our campaigns. But after getting familiar with narratives method, it shaped my way of advocating, connecting to the community and engaging them. Why? Because people want to be heard. It's first. Because that way they feel that they are valued, that their voice is being heard. And then when you share your story, also they see at you a person of trust, and they are ready, because you also, through your telling, you also shape their listening. That way you have higher chances to engage them. And where you engage them, you don't engage, I don't engage them in nothing that is that they don't know or that is not familiar to them, because when you start talking to people and when you listen to their stories, you will see that all of them, doesn't matter where they live or how wealthy or poor they are all aware of the situation, of the context where they are living in, and they all know where we should go and what we should achieve. So they just need someone who will invite them, conditionally said, and how they will be invited if you don't give them the opportunity to say what they think.
That's so profound, Akif, this invitation for people to participate, in a sense, in their own destiny. But I want to ask you, when you say that people know what needs to be done, is that something that people are ready, in your experience, you know, with the communities that you've dealt with, are people able to articulate that clearly? Or is it just a kind of a sense that people have, you know, or like it's a feeling that people have of what needs to be done? But to what extent are people able to articulate that? In other words, to what extent are people to articulate how the future should pan out for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. In general, the ordinary people are not articulating that very well, but they all know, they have this feeling that, you know, we can do better, we deserve better. I mean, if others can live better, we can live better as well. And that's enough, you know, because when we create that environment of mutual telling and listening, and when we get the trust to one another, then us, as someone conditionally said, who have greater vision, we try to, you know, to send our vision to them with their words. And then they are ready, you know, to first to see your vision, and then to embody it, you know, to feel it as their own. Because if they don't feel it as their own, I mean, we wasted our time. Because my goal is not, you know, only to achieve some goals and to stand in front of people to say, I did this, I succeeded in this, you know. But the ordinary people, you know, people from the community who don't have these opportunities that we do, you know, to feel important and to say, you know, we did this. So when they embody the vision, they are ready to go all the way with you, you know.
And that's what it is to be a leader. And what's so interesting is that right up front in the beginning of this webinar, you mirrored for us what you're talking about by saying, I don't want to be seen as the only leader. I'm not the only leader. I'm part of a network of leaders. And I suppose that if you're going to be talking about unifying communities, Roma communities across Europe, how could it possibly be that you would only have one leader? You have to have a multiplicity of leaders. And in that invitation is the implication, in a sense, that everybody can rise to the occasion. Everybody can step up into that position once they are able to recognize it, recognize the vision as their own. So that's really my reflection on what I take from what you just said.
Yeah.
We do have some questions that are coming in. Thanks, Akif, for that. So one question is for you, Akif, in particular, when you're working with storytelling for your advocacy purposes, Sylvie is wondering if you are working with a specific listener in mind, like media, politicians, non-governmental organizations, leaders. What would be your answer to that? Do you have any specific listener in mind when you're working with storytelling for advocacy?
Yeah, okay, so the first layer, since I am community organizer, I mean people from the community. Yeah.
And so who would that be, for example? Do you have an example of that?
People who live regular life, who are not politically engaged, who are not members of any NGOs, no, who just have regular jobs or are unemployed.
Yeah, understood. Got it. So that's really the grassroots.
Yeah, the grassroots.
We call grassroots here. Yeah. I have another question, which is from Olga, and she's asking, she's curious about what has been the difference for you between using storytelling with the Roma community and the non-Roma in your work. Has there been any difference?
Well, yes. Storytelling in my work with the Roma community is storytelling with brothers and sisters, and it's different level of intimacy. And while storytelling can work with the non-Roma community, is more mainstreaming and trying to be more rational. While working with your own community, you are more emotional. I mean, it's normal, I think, because we are more emotional, emotionally attached to our own community, our group. And I wouldn't say less with the mainstream, but that's why it is called mainstream, because all the groups are there, and you cannot, share your story in that level of depth and intimacy as with someone who is practically your neighbor and has faced the same challenges and obstacles throughout the life.
Mm.
May I just jump in there and offer a reflection? Akif, when you presented, you and your colleagues presented your stories at the Power of Storytelling conference in Bucharest, and you pretty much, gave a rendition at the time of the story that you shared with us today. People were profoundly, that was what I witnessed and what people said to me. They were profoundly moved by the story that you shared, and had never really been aware in such a personal and intimate way of the kinds of issues and confrontations that Roma people had in their own countries. So you were able to bring a tremendous amount of intimacy and emotion just from the way of being to telling your story. But it does make sense to me as well that if you were talking to people in your community, well, just the level of connection to what you're talking about would be all that much higher.
Yeah, it is one thing, I agree with you, but also other thing, because you, before the conference, gave me the task. This is not where you will share your story, so the people there tell, this is good, but okay, you are different than the other Roma. So your task is to change their minds about how they see Roma in general. And that was the challenge, and that's why I shared the story in that way.
That's great. I have to reflect on that one too, because I feel like that's such a great point for our audience in terms of knowing why you're telling the story. There was a very specific question that was asked of you, or a challenge, as you put it. And the challenge is, don't assume anything, basically. And the challenge is to try to even change people's minds about how they might see the Roma. And so that challenges you to think about an experience that you had in your own life that could do that. And so I think for anyone who's on this webinar to learn more about how they can use storytelling, that's the first essential question you have to ask yourself is, why am I telling a story? And what are the questions that I need to ask myself or ask someone else to ask me that can lead to the right story, and the story that's going to really answer that why. So I think that's a great kind of highlight that you've just pointed out here. We have about 3 minutes left. There was one question that had more to do with the very beginning of our conversation and the term gypsy. So this person is asking, how does Akif relate to some Roma who actually prefer the term gypsy? I have seen musicians and Roma from different countries using the term gypsy.
Yeah, I have seen that as well. And I use every opportunity to, whenever I have chance, to talk with those people why we shouldn't use that term. And activists are already, doing some work with their communities about the meaning of the term gypsy, and that it is not, word that was invented by the Roma. Yeah, and it is not a term that is used in positive context with positive meaning. And people are working on that, and I don't relate, any differently with those people. I mean, at the end, we are the same, just they, with the difference that my impression is that they have internalized that term more than me personally.
Yeah.
There is also, this stereotype among the Roma from the other countries. I mean, I don't want to sound cruel, but, one girl from Romania once told me, because I heard her using the term Țigan, gypsy. And I asked her, why did you use that term? Now we are Roma, we are not gypsy. And she said, oh yeah, in Romania we use that word, and we are still used to use that word. But I heard that you in Macedonia, you could kill if you heard that word, I mean, there wasn't such case, but she was referring to this sense of belonging and pride, of being a Roma, and not, allowing to be intimidated with this term gypsy.
Yeah.
I know that we're running out of time, but I do want to say something here, which I feel is so crucial, and that is the distinction between what, Akif, you are saying right now, which is a deep understanding of the way that words and language actually affect the way that we see ourselves and the way that the world see us, and the vital and crucial importance that you are announcing here about reframing and rephrasing. Now, this could easily be labeled under that sort of hammer of political correctness. You've got to be politically correct, and God help you if you use this word, you should not use this word. And for me, what differentiates this from political correctness is the understanding behind it, and that you are really appealing to people to investigate their identity, and you're appealing to others to investigate what Roma actually means. So it's not just legislating that people use the term, or they'll be punished if they use the term, but rather that the change of the term from gypsy to Roma is an opportunity to re-examine what Roma actually means. And as you so beautifully articulated for us, the history that led to the use of the term gypsy. So I just really want to highlight that the importance of differentiating what you're talking about from so-called political correctness. There's a story behind what you're saying.
Yeah, that's exactly what was coming to my mind as well, Murray, of just that there's a story behind this. And I do think that that's, what stories do, is that they really do help give context, they help give a frame, even if they're very, very personal. That's the kind of paradox, actually. You've heard a lot of personal stories in this webinar in just the last 45 minutes or so. And all of them can be linked to a larger context and can help to actually reframe a conversation so that it helps people create more understanding of a particular issue. And here it's just one word that we're talking about, but it has such a deep impact and meaning, much more than just the word itself. And so I think that's really what I'm taking away from this, and really this conversation as a whole, is a deeper understanding of the Roma through your eyes, really, Akif, and through your own lived experience. And I think that's why it's so important for us to gather as many of these experiences as we can and listen to them and investigate them and hear them and watch them and just ignite our curiosity about things that we don't know. Because there's people behind those things, and there are people behind those words, and their stories need to be heard. So that's really the work that we do so much of at Narativ. And so it was really fantastic to be able to share this experience with a wider audience here. And so I really want to thank, first of all, everyone who's participated in this and who's attended this this webinar, for your questions. If you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to email them to me. My email is jerome@narativ, narativ.com, and I'll relay them to our panelists. If you want to learn more about our work, we've talked a lot about our work in advocacy here on this webinar. There's a lot that we can do perhaps for your organization or others that you may know, so please be in touch about that too. And really thank you for attending, for participating, for making this webinar possible. I want to thank you, Akif, for coming here. I know you had an unexpected journey in Vienna today, and that's where you're talking to us from, but you made time to be able to be on this call and really be present and share your deeply personal stories with us. It's very inspiring to me to be in your presence and to hear those stories, so thank you so much. And thank you, Murray, for as always, showing up for the task and really sharing your own experience of this work at Narativ and facilitating this conversation with Akif. I found that, you know, what was maybe most interesting to me were those moments of conversation between the two of you. So thank you for being present for that and showing up for this.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the listening, because if you weren't listening, I wouldn't be able to share those stories.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Jerome, for showing up today, feeling on antibiotics and not feeling all that great. That really is the commitment that you have to share this work with others. And I think that no matter how we're feeling at Narativ, when we have to talk about our work, it kind of makes us feel a lot better, even if it's only temporary. And also Sasha and Beth, who are with us in our Narativ office right now. Thank you so much for all that you've done. And Akif, all I can say to you is that I'm just so excited that we are stepping into the future together, and that I get to continue to support this extraordinary journey that you and your fellow leaders, your fellow Roma leaders are on. So I'm really excited to be part of the next chapter that you're writing.
Yeah, looking forward for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if you haven't done so yet, attendees of this webinar, please sign up for our mailing list, because that's where you get to hear about this future narrative, and you'll hear about future webinars. We are planning more, so please do come to our website, sign up for our mailing list, and then of course you'll be receiving a replay of this webinar in just a couple of weeks with some of the main talking points. So thank you again. I'm now going to push end meeting, and that will be goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much.